Before officially entering the auction, the three of them happily shared a meal together. Crapin, speak up, it's great to see you're still as healthy as ever. Even though a lot of time has passed, I still haven't officially been able to apologize to you. I heard you've been through some difficult times because of someone incompetent in our family. It truly was a challenging period. We expelled him by royal decree, but I still want to apologize to you once again. Princess Phinia, after hearing this, calmly looked up and replied, it's all right, Crapin, there's no need to make a big deal out of it. After speaking, she glanced at the smiling face in front of her and thought, Crapin Rothtailor, the one related by blood to Ed Rothtailor. He was also a noble of dignity, seriousness, and wisdom, the head of the family, a duke with absolute power. Just by observing the attitudes of the servants around him, it was clear they had great respect for him. But his eyes revealed that this man was extremely cruel. At the same moment, Crapin glanced over at Lordle beside him and asked, and you are? The lady over there. Are you the representative of the Elt Trading Company? Upon hearing the question, Lordle politely stood up and introduced herself. I am Lordle Ketcheln, it's an honor to be here, though I still have many shortcomings, Crapin praised her. You must be the daughter of Gold King Elt Ketcheln. I've heard of your wisdom and bold spirit. She smiled slightly and admitted, wherever there are items that bring great profit, we will be there. Money is her master, and she always follow the scent of gold. I see, Crapin said calmly, though his expression seemed to reflect that he was deep in thought about something. Time quickly passed as the negotiations to purchase Sage's sealed grimoire were divided into several stages. After forming the negotiation side, they had lunch, checked the condition of Sage's sealed grimoire, and confirmed the payment method after all sides had made their bids. The highest bidder would acquire the grimoire. Sage's sealed grimoire was a treasure of the Sylvania Academy. The head of the department didn't want to make this public because the academy was facing financial difficulties and had to sell Sage's sealed grimoire. Therefore, Principal Abelforcius proposed a wise plan. As the princess, I would stand as a witness and ensure the success of this negotiation. Vice Principal Rachel, representing the principal, would secretly orchestrate the auction. The method was kept as simple as possible. Whoever wrote down the highest amount would acquire Sage's sealed grimoire. After hearing about this method, I investigated previous transactions of similar books. First was the Book of Order, a tome filled with spells related to alchemy, written by a legendary alchemist, with a price of 8,100 gold coins. Next was the Book of Similitude, which contained analyses of magic and biological cloning in the world, currently stored in the Royal Library, priced at 6,730 gold coins. Lastly, there was the Diary of the Mage, written by Archmage Glock during his exploration of the southern continent, filled with many mysteries, priced at 7,020 gold coins. The value of magic inheritance, its academic research significance, and its worth as a luxury item. That girl must have memorized the prices and recorded the transactions of many other books. But the one who would obtain the grimoire would be Crapin Rothtailor, Phinia thought to herself. I wondered why she felt so certain about that. After both parties had written down their amounts, the two maidservants quickly brought the papers to Vice Principal Rachel and spoke. We have received the amounts you both offered. Thank you for your participation. After speaking, she quietly observed. Meanwhile, Princess Phinia continued to speculate about an auction with no limit on the amount and decided by a single bid. The key point of this rule was to know the highest amount that your opponent could offer. Moreover, from the very beginning, Lordle had already revealed her intention to profit from the situation. If she wanted to make a profit, she wouldn't bid higher than the price of the most expensive book, which was 8,100 gold coins. Trying to sell for a higher price would be very difficult, and she would incur a loss. So, if Crapin wrote down a price slightly higher than Lordle's highest bid of 8,000 gold coins, then Sage's sealed grimoire would be his. Turning to the vice principal, after finishing her checks, she announced the results. Now I will reveal the amounts you both have offered. On Crapin Rothtailor's side, the bid is 8,500 gold coins. As she spoke, she raised the paper that Crapin had written on for everyone to verify. This confirmed Princess Phinia's thoughts. Just as she had predicted, Crapin Rothtailor was not there to profit from the book's transaction. The most important question was why he wanted to acquire it at such a high price. The princess wondered to herself. Then, Vice Principal Rachel announced Lordle's bid. Lordle Ketcheln has offered 9,400 gold coins. The right to purchase Sage's sealed grimoire will belong to the Elt Merchant Guild. Lordle bowed her head in thanks at this declaration. Meanwhile, the princess thought to herself, isn't profit her main objective? On the opposite side, Crapin, realizing he had failed, let out a frustrated click of his tongue. He then left with his entourage, while Phinia remained deep in thought, trying to understand what Lordle's true objective was. Could it be that from the very beginning, Lordle's goal was simply to prevent the grimoire from falling into the hands of someone like Crapin? The princess then dismissed the thought, thinking, no, she's not the kind of person who would act out of righteousness. Yet, regardless of how things stood, the notion that Crapin was a villain remained just her speculation. Even though she had the authority of a princess, she still couldn't find any evidence. This had to be a request or an order from someone else, someone behind Lordle, controlling the situation, someone who understood Crapin Rothtailor's dark nature and wanted to stop him. He was cast out of his family and thrown into the woods, even though he lived with that strong determination. To the point of collapsing from exhaustion, he still fought against the darkness within the Rothtailor family, Ed Rothtailor. Thinking of this, the princess felt all her strength drain away as she wondered what she had done. She had caused an innocent person to suffer this much. Phineas bitterly reflected on these thoughts in her heart. The princess was drowning in feelings of guilt. However, her misunderstanding might turn out to be a blessing in disguise. Lordle was now in her private room, holding the purchase agreement for the sage's sealed grimoire. The contract stated that the buyer was Lordle Ketchon from the Elt Guild, and the seller was Abel Forcius from Sylvania. The transaction amount was 9,400 gold coins, and the ownership would be transferred within 7 days from the signing of the agreement, with the details of the contract outlined further. Despite having to buy the book at an outrageous price, Lordle felt incredibly happy. She thought to herself that if she sold the sage's sealed grimoire to Duke Crapin, she could make at least 8,500 gold coins. Isn't that right? She wondered. I bought it for 9,400 gold coins, so the profit margin would be about 900 gold coins. But whether or not she sold it back wasn't important. As she spoke, she glanced at the letter Ed had sent her, which read, "As long as she have the sage's sealed grimoire, he can fulfill any request she gave him." Lordle was thinking that Ed was about to fulfill any request from a merchant. She considered that this mistake he was making was anything but ordinary. She was lost in thought, considering that exchanging 900 gold coins for the right to have Ed was certainly not a bad deal at all. Any request at all, anything that Lordle just mentioned, with a face that looked visibly happy. If the princess saw this expression, she would surely choke on her blood. Back to Ed. At this moment, Ziggs also arrived to fill him in on everything about the auction. In the end, Lordle emerged victorious, and mentioned he should have seen Lordle's expression when Ziggs handed her that letter. Luckily, Elka was very naive. Ed replied tiredly, "Yeah." Ed thought to himself that Lordle had a moderate interest in him, and she might very well be betting on information provided by someone from the Rothtailor family. He felt a bit regretful when considering what was about to unfold. Suddenly, the voice of the busty Jenica echoed through the room. "Ed, you're awake," she exclaimed as she rushed over. Ziggs, noticing her hurried approach, wondered why she was here so early since it wasn't even lunchtime yet. "Hey, Senior Jenica, it's not time for lunch yet. How did you get all the way from the professor's building?" he asked. "I finished all my morning classes, and now I have no more classes left," she replied, catching her breath after rushing. "I'll handle my homework tonight." Ed, noticing her presence, chimed in, "Oh, Jenica, sorry for making you worry. Ziggs has already told me everything." "Did I cause a lot of trouble?" Ed asked, sounding concerned. "Not at all." Jenica waved her hand dismissively, but unfortunately, her attempt to downplay the situation was quickly undermined by Ziggs, who saw right through her. Jenica, the senior, was crying and running around the academy. There were rumors that she had a broken heart, and that time she burst into the student's room. Ziggs kept babbling without realizing he was touching the forbidden topic of that spirit mage. It was really embarrassing. So she immediately grabbed his hair and pinched his cheek. At the same time, she summoned a big bear to cover his mouth and dragged him away to prevent him from spilling more embarrassing stories. "This is quite an interesting story, Ziggs, but the weather is really cold today. Be careful not to catch a cold," she said, waving goodbye to him. At the same time, the fire bat mug poked its head out from Jenica's hair and cried, looking toward Ed. "Please kill me, Master Ed, just kill me." Mug, the lowly bat, lamented, realizing that Master Ed was overworking himself again. "I want to apologize to you right away, but Miss Jenica warned me not to let my presence have a negative impact on Master Ed." As it spoke, Mug cried out loudly, causing Ed to feel a headache. "Why are you making such a fuss?" Returning to the guy Ziggs, somehow he managed to control the bear and come back here. "Senior Ed, it's because you've been unconscious for 10 days. It's nothing, really." Hearing him explain this, Ed nodded in understanding. "If I were unconscious for 10 days, it makes sense." At this point, Ed suddenly realized something. Wait, has it been 10 days? While he was unconscious for 10 days, all the meat had rotted. The fishing net had also become tangled and torn apart. He had lost all his food and had to start over. Ed feeling frustrated, after checking everything, as if they could read his thoughts. Then the little wife immediately stepped in to complain. "You probably want to work hard again, right, Ed?" "Don't worry, Ed, we'll help you," Jenica said, rolling up her sleeves. Ziggs added, "I still have some free time before the upcoming exam. I can help you hunt or make wooden tools." If we tackle each issue one at a time, things will gradually go smoothly, he heard them say. Ed's face showed a bit of confusion upon hearing their words. He suddenly remembered not long ago, under a hastily built wooden shelter made from whatever materials could be found in the forest. He had slept alone in the darkness, bitten by insects, with nowhere to lean on. There had indeed been many challenges, but so far, he had endured and overcome even more difficulties. That's right, in the end, everything will be fine, Ed thought to himself. On this side, Jenica looked at his weary appearance and recalled her private conversation with the high spirit, Marilda. He looked incredibly tired. You think so too, right? Jenica asked. Hearing the question, the high spirit Marilda, who was beside her, advised, "This is a good opportunity, Jenica. The timing is perfect since that sly fox is busy negotiating and can't come to the campsite. In this regard, that fox is quite clever, so you should learn a lot from her. If you want to pursue a man, you need to have some qualities like that sly fox, whether you like it or not." At this point, she also looked at Jenica's outfit, and her first assessment was that she looked like a country girl. Jenica admitted and realized this outfit is too worn out when feeling embarrassed. However, Marilda didn't see it that simply. She thought it was actually perfect. Her cheerful and lively attitude was very appealing, but men like to pretend they didn't care, with cold expressions, while subtle gestures could be charming. That's true, Jenica said excitedly, quickly gathering her hair into a bun. Yes, and roll up your sleeves too, exactly, and tie your hair up. If you can make him feel that you're a loyal wife, always by his side during tough times, that would be great. Are you planning to meet him today? Then go ahead, you definitely need to make some progress today, you hear, the high-level spirit and love expert, Marilda, instructed carefully. Progress, Zenitsa said with a confused look, causing Marilda to lose her patience and say nothing more. Forget it, tell me, Jenica, what was your original plan when you go to the campsite to help him later? How do you intend to approach him? She asked eagerly, making Jenica feel a bit intimidated. Well, I don't really have a plan, she admitted. On the other side, Marilda felt her heart start to ache after hearing that. Educating a clueless person about matters of the heart was truly a challenging task for her. How can that be? You need to seize the opportunity, do you understand? Do you think a cold-hearted guy like him will face such difficulties a second time? She exclaimed. Look how quickly he's getting stronger. It's just unreasonable, right? Do you really think this opportunity will come again? The best way to ensure victory is to be by someone's side during their toughest times. You have to take on the role of supporting him when he faces challenges. Even if it seems a bit selfish and cunning, Marilda said continuously like a machine, prompting Jenica to hurriedly try to interrupt her. But yes, I've come up with a way, just listen to me for a moment. Then Jenica began to whisper into the spirit's ear. Marilda couldn't tell exactly what she said, but after hearing it, she nodded slightly and thought, oh, that's interesting. The scene shifted to night at Ed's house, where the night sky was very dark. However, the soup that Jenica cooked was much tastier than what Ziggs had prepared. I'd better learn how to cook, he thought, but first, I need to focus on regaining my strength. She's helped me a lot, and I can't always show her my tired face. He couldn't even claim that his health was good. He was running a fever and felt dizzy, exhausted. He thought this while lying on the bed. But at that moment, the sound of the door opening caught his attention. Jenica's voice rang out. You look really tired, Ed, seeing her familiar figure. Then Ed also asked, aren't you home yet? He wondered what she was planning to do. I'm not planning to do anything, Jenica replied as she leaned back against Ed's bed, surprising him a bit. Then why you are here? Without answering that question, she began to offer her advice. You don't need to pretend that you're okay. When your body isn't well, your mind will be tired too. That's how it is for everyone, she said. I know you're more hardworking and diligent than anyone else, Ed. Even when I'm tired and struggling, I still have many people to comfort and help me. But ultimately, what makes me strongest isn't someone rushing to comfort me or doing something for me. It's just having someone who can quietly be by my side. Jenica looked straight at Ed and said that he had really tried his best. Hadn't he? He had done very well. It was just like the way he had once done for her before. Naturally, with Ed's intelligence, he understood her intentions, so he said she didn't need to do so much. Seeing Ed's response, Jenica sighed and complained. She told him that he needed to admit he was struggling in order to rest properly. She urged Ed to acknowledge that he was exhausted. Ed, upon hearing this, didn't even bother to open his eyes anymore. He just flopped onto the bed and admitted that, indeed, everything was hard. Ed mumbled that everything was incredibly difficult and extremely challenging. Meanwhile, she quietly stayed by his side. And so, Time quickly passed until the next morning. When Ed woke up, he felt much better. After looking at Jenica, who was sleeping next to him with drool on her face, Ed felt a sense of relief. Ed couldn't help but burst out laughing. He happy about his body has completely recovered. Recapping the player's skills with a bit of survival instinct, life skills details, rank intermediate craftsman, specialty carpentry, handiness 14, design 10, gathering ability 13, carpentry 13, stonemasonry 6, hunting 10, fishing 7, cooking 6, reppering 5, advanced crafting skill spirit formula infusion and magic engineering. Magic engineering skill proficiency 2, understanding of magic product 3, quick production 3, collected crafting formulas, weak wind emitter 1, echo noise generator 1, sensory automatic magic chessboard 1. After observing his skills, Ed thought to himself that he didn't have many opportunities to improve in the next 10 days as planned, especially in researching magic techniques. Advanced manufacturing techniques have a significant impact on core metrics and their versatility, which cannot be compared to ordinary skills. The current issue is that self-study alone limits the number of magic artifacts one can create. Most of the magic technique crafting recipes are rewards from main storyline quests. So, for someone like him who wants to avoid interrupting the storyline, obtaining those rewards is a bit challenging. However, looking back, Taylor wasn't very interested in magic techniques. Perhaps because, even if he had the recipes, he couldn't create useful magic artifacts. To craft them, he needed materials that were very hard to obtain until the latter half of the main storyline. But his situation was different because there was someone here who could buy any materials he needed. Even if it was in another world, he thought as he glanced over at Lordle beside him. His demeanor made her a bit curious, and she asked what he was thinking so intently about. Lordle expressed relief that Ed had recovered, saying she had been very worried. Ed calmly replied that he was glad to see she looked healthy. Lordle, slightly skeptical, mentioned that, believe it or not, she was actually feeling very exhausted. Do you know how difficult it is to take care of your skin and detangle your hair? She asked. Hearing her say that, he nodded in agreement. You must be really busy. You went all the way to the northern forest, but you need to rest, he said. We also have some things to sort out. Turning toward Lordle, she sat down beside Ed and began to explain. Elt is no longer here, so it feels a bit strange to keep the name Elt. We plan to change it to a trading company and reorganize the business, she explained. They needed authority to manage labor, assets, sales, and external relations. They needed someone to hold that position. She looked at Ed with a meaningful gaze and asked if he was interested. Then, she began to daydream, imagining waking up each morning and heading to the trading guild building, with just a wall separating them. She mentioned that the benefits weren't small either, and he would share co-management of the Elt Trading Guild. She would also allocate a portion of the private assets to him, making it seem like they had become one. At this point, her face turned bright red, and she exclaimed, wondering why she was saying such nonsense. Hey, Lordle, it's kind of strange that you're doing all these things, Ed remarked. In response, the Golden Daughter fell silent for a few seconds before replying. You don't know anything, she said. I know exactly how you feel. You're probably thinking why she's doing all this, she said. You can't make such a big decision and take advantage of a girl's fleeting feelings like this, can you? You're probably thinking you want to maintain a fair partnership between the two of us, she said. Ed replied coldly, not exactly. Lordle continued to explain that in a world where money easily shifts from one person to another, and if they don't betray others, they will eventually be betrayed themselves. What does one think people will need when living a life like that? Someone who will never betray me, who will always stay by my side, even if one day all the wealth I've built collapses. Or if the whole world abandoned me, that person would still not turn their back on me, she said as she gently placed her hand on Ed's. For some people, that person might be family or a lover. For others, it might be close friends. But for Lordle, who had witnessed countless great merchants succeed and fail, the truth that one day she might end up in such a situation was a fear that always existed in her heart. I don't ask for much from you, she said softly. She said with eyes full of emotion, asking Ed to just stay by her side. Faced with Lordle's expectation, Ed looked at her with a puzzled expression and complained. Lordle, stop with the smirk and just say what you mean, Ed said coldly, which made her burst out laughing. She admitted it didn't work and that she almost tricked him, but her raised voice gave her away. Ed then reminded the mischievous girl to be careful. Meanwhile, Lordle looked over at him with a tender expression, saying that she also had pride as a human and asked how he felt. Did she stir his heart a little? She showed him her charming exterior, confident that she had surely captured his heart by now. At this point, Lordle's voice softened a bit. She remarked that it was indeed a shame, but not everything she said was a lie. A voice tinged with regret echoed, causing the atmosphere to suddenly become silent. Then, Ed stated his goal. He intended to graduate from Sylvania Academy, and until then, he had no intention of leaving the academy. He calmly said that he hadn't yet decided what he would do after graduating, which made the merchant girl smile slightly. Then, she stood up and said that she could wait for him until he graduated. However, she noted that he knew he didn't have any other choice. She said with a mischievous grin, "You might have to seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity immediately. It's really nice to see you again after such a long time." Ed could only sigh in response, feeling a weight pressing down on his chest as he thought about the possibilities. Maybe I made a mistake somewhere along the way, he mused, the burden on his heart growing heavier with each passing thought. At that moment, Lordle wiped the sweat from her forehead, relieved. "I almost confessed," she thought to herself, her heart racing, and ended it all right here. But seeing the expression on his face, "My plan is all messed up now," Lordle thought anxiously. "If I don't leave right away, I might show my sad face." Even brought money to buy advanced crafting materials, Lordle thought. But now, facing him feels a bit awkward. Maybe I should just leave it in the bushes, Lordle thought to herself. Just at that moment, Ed's house door swung wide open. Jenica stepped outside, hugging a pillow, and asked, "Ed went to the river, didn't he? I should prepare some snacks before he gets back." And at that very moment, both Jenica and Lordle suddenly realized each other's presence and were startled. "Why are you coming from there?" Lordle asked. Bewildered, Jenica, equally surprised, responded, "And why are you coming from the direction of the river?" With that, both women began glaring at each other, their eyes full of suspicion, as a quiet tension built between them. For Ed, this was the beginning of a new disaster. Back to Ed, he was chopping wood and worrying about his health when Mug, the fire bat, started reminding him that he hadn't eaten much meat and vegetables today. Mug told Ed he needed to eat more tonight, said that if he fainted again, it would be the end of him. Mug pleaded for Ed to stay healthy for his sake, hoping their bond would last a long time. "It sounds like you're scolding me," Ed nodded and said, "but if disaster comes, it can't be avoided, sorry, Mug." Ed glanced at the letters in his hand, reflecting on how Ziggs and Jenica had helped him stock up on food and firewood. Thanks to Lordle, he had also managed to complete the interior. Now, there was just one thing left to take care of. The 3 letters Ed had received before collapsing from overwork were still on his mind. One was from Lordle, warning him to be cautious, as no one could predict what Elt might do next. Another letter came from Princess Phenia, informing him about Krapen's movements. The final letter was from the Academy, but the sender took Ed by surprise. It was from Professor Glast. In the letter, he mentioned wanting to meet with Ed after the conference. Unfortunately, Ed had fainted and missed the opportunity to meet Professor Glast. Now, he was exhausted last time, so unable to figure out why the professor had summoned him in the first place. Professor Glast was revealed to be the final antagonist of Act 2. And with the final chapter of this act now underway, Ed found himself reflecting on everything that had led up to this moment. He vividly remembered most of the crucial events from the closing chapter of Act 2. Professor Glast had always believed that only a select few geniuses could truly change the world. His ambition was to revive the greatest sage in Sylvania's history. He had been researching holy magic, a power capable of disrupting and reshaping the natural order of the world. To perfect this forbidden magic, Professor Glast needed the sage's sealed grimoire, an ancient and powerful tome. However, due to Lordle's cunning manipulation, the Sylvania Academy fell into a trap and sold the grimoire. He had no other option but to steal the sage's sealed grimoire himself. His plan was to use it to transfer the soul of Sylvania, the greatest sage in history, into the body of Isla. Taylor's childhood friend, caught up in Glast's grand scheme, became a pivotal part of his plan to restore the golden age of Sylvania. But Taylor arrived just in time to save Isla, breaking through the traps in the underground waterways and the secret laboratory known as the Soul Library. The last words of him, spoken just before he fell from the magic tower after his plans were thwarted, were quite astonishing. Even though he solely sought to make advancements in academia and dedicated his entire life to discovering talent. Not sure what his final words were, but it seems like a pretty dramatic moment to forget. But anyway, the final battle of episode 2, which initiated Professor Glast's subjugation, involved the transfer of ownership of the sage's sealed grimoire and the resonance ritual. It all began when Professor Glast kidnapped his student, Isla. Transitioning to a dark prison, a voice suddenly echoed, "You're awake, Isla," the person said. "Don't come near me." The other person continued, mentioning how terrifying the demons in the underground sewers were. Isla responded, saying it was all his doing. "How could you do that? I hate you, Ed Roth-Taylor," she said as tears began to well up in her eyes. Ed looked at Isla and spoke up, asking if this wasn't a bit too much. They had been kidnapped together. That's right, he had also been kidnapped. The final chapter of Act 2 began with the start of the Professor Glassed invasion. Returning to 3 days earlier, before Ed was kidnapped, our main character was still struggling with his magical devices. Although he had completed all the tasks he couldn't do 10 days ago, unfortunately, he hadn't been able to practice during those 10 days. He thought to himself that the Professor Glassed invasion had probably started by now. Unfortunately, he still couldn't improve his magical skills. To practice his magical techniques, he needed the design and materials. Ed felt a sense of regret as he reflected on this. Before his mind clicked, he suddenly remembered something. Wait a minute, he thought. He remembered now. There was a way to significantly increase his magical skills at the final stage of the Glassed invasion. There were 4 locations among them. The most challenging location was the secret laboratory. The final boss of this level was Reina, the librarian of the Soul Library, who was extremely powerful. She was so strong that without the Holy Sword ritual, she couldn't be defeated. But that problem could be left for Taylor to handle. As for him, he was more interested in the contents inside the Soul Library. That place contained countless valuable magical technique formulas. He remembered there were at least over 20 of them. There were even 2 formulas for crafting legendary grade magical items. However, this was a risky endeavor, as long as he didn't go there alone. Everything would be fine, right? Ed said, glancing over at Jenica, who was happily sitting behind him. The scene shifted to Professor Glass's lecture hall, where he was now speaking to the students below. Adele from Class B and Isla from Class C were expected to advance to Class A in the upcoming semester. This year, there were many talented students. Even though they were moving up to higher classes midway, their learning wouldn't be interrupted, so there was no need to worry. Hearing him say that, Lordle began to reflect. There were many outstanding students, and currently, Class A only had 4 members. Next semester, it would increase to 5. During Professor Glass's time teaching, Class A had barely existed. Isla's combat ability wasn't high, but she was said to be very perceptive with holy magic. At the same time, Ziggs seemed to have some opinions and raised his hand to speak. He felt a bit awkward bringing this up, but he said that the criteria for entering Class A truly relied solely on talent. The potential of some students could blossom in an extraordinary way through effort. Upon hearing him say that, Glass narrowed his eyes slightly. Are you suggesting that we underestimate and disregard their efforts by ignoring and obstructing them, Ziggs? I'm sorry, Ziggs quickly said, that's not what I meant. In fact, the most effective way to ruin someone's life is to acknowledge their ambiguous talent and push them forward hastily. Glass calmly replied, while Lordle let out a sigh. Before enrolling at Sylvania, the professors here had already checked the students' backgrounds. His obsession with talent had made him stubborn and arrogant, perhaps stemming from his only daughter. Muri was an average mage, but he had placed too much expectation on her. This was understandable for a father. However, Muri believed that these expectations didn't come from her father but from Professor Glass, the head of the magic department. Because of this belief, she participated in the demon tribe invasion while still very young. And then, Muri sacrificed herself on the battlefield. Because of this, she had heard that Professor Glass became obsessed with talent. Most of his teaching time at Sylvania was focused on searching for a mysterious type of magic known as holy magic. But looking back at his past made everything clear. What Professor Glass was aiming for wasn't holy magic, but rather, it was the one who created that holy magic, the person rightfully deemed the most talented in history, the Grand Sage of Sylvania. Perhaps the reason he wanted Isla in Class A was because of his research on holy magic, Lordle speculated to herself. At that moment, Glass also turned to her and said, and Lordle Ketchuln, this matter isn't related to class, so I will call you in tomorrow, Glass said while organizing his stack of documents. The wealthy girl immediately guessed something. He must be referring to the sage's sealed grimoire. Unfortunately, this grimoire was primarily used for researching holy magic, but no matter what he said, it would be useless. She would soon undergo the ceremony to take ownership of the sage's sealed grimoire. At the same time, in Ed's classroom, he was also thinking about that book. The ceremony to take ownership of the sage's sealed grimoire would soon begin. Although it was quite risky, he still managed to carry out this plan. The key point of this operation was to follow closely. Following Taylor's route through levels 1 to 5 to rescue Isla and collect the items he left behind. Especially in level 3, he needed to collect all the magical items from the Soul Library. He even made a list of essential items to bring along. First was the magical artifact, Glocksai, which temporarily increased magical power and proficiency in all skills related to agility. The second was Delheim's Hourglass, which had the effect of restoring the user's condition to a few seconds earlier. These magical artifacts were incredibly powerful. However, due to the difficulty in finding the materials, these items could only be crafted later in the storyline, therefore, they wouldn't be beneficial to Taylor at all. He would be the one to keep them. And he would also observe Taylor's performance in the 5th stage before returning to his wooden house. After that, this plan would be complete. The glassed conquest will begin on the same day as the ceremony for the ownership of the sage's sealed grimoire. I told Jenica that something was missing in the tunnel, so we would go look for it together. I thought she hated dark and cramped places, but I don't understand why she's being so proactive. Maybe it's because she's worried about me, which makes me feel a bit embarrassed. But with a reliable companion by my side, my plan has become flawless, Ed thought to himself. Just then, Claire's voice suddenly rang out, waking him up. Student Ed. Professor Glast is calling for you, said Claire, who was the assistant of Professor Glast. He heard Jenica mention that she had been stopping by the cabin recently. He wondered what that was about. The ownership ceremony for the sage's sealed grimoire is tomorrow, Ed thought, feeling overwhelmed. I am really busy right now. Why is Glass calling me now? I was exhausted before and couldn't even respond to his letter. But now he's calling for me? It must be something important, Ed wondered to himself. But he quickly made his way to Glass's office. And here, Ed also ran into Isla. The moment she saw him appear, she looked at Ed with a gaze full of suspicion. Why are you here, Ed? Isla questioned, her reaction making Ed let out a sigh. He thought to himself, I haven't done anything yet. Her response seems a bit excessive. The poor relationship between Isla and me has lasted for over 10 months now, and to make matters worse, I even shot an arrow at her. But despite that, Isla is the one who will be kidnapped when the Glast expedition starts tomorrow. Why is she here? And why was I called too? Could it be? The more he thought about it, the paler Ed's face became. And then, right after that, he dashed towards the pile of documents on the desk, frantically flipping through them in search of something. Without any research notes or annotations, the grimoire, as far as he knows, doesn't contain anything that can change the future. Here it is, all the things related to Ed Roth-Taylor. This event was something Assistant Professor Claire was keeping an eye on. Had I reported it already? If so, perhaps Professor Glast knew about my actions in the Ophilus Hall. But what did this have to do with the current situation? Ed worriedly pondered. Before the sound of the door suddenly creaked open, Ed instinctively drew his knife and pointed it forward. The person who just arrived was none other than Professor Glast. Please help me, he's holding a knife, Isla exclaimed as she rushed toward the professor. Unfortunately, it was contrary to her expectations. At that moment, Glast began to use his magic. He created a time cage to capture her. He then turned his gaze toward Ed, intending to capture him as well. But Ed reacted quickly. Before he could reach out, Ed threw the knife inscribed with his magic seal forward. And then, the inscriptions engraved on the knife began to glow brightly, causing a significant explosion within the room. However, it seemed that it wasn't enough to trouble the professor. You grasped the situation quite quickly, he said, admiring her swift response. In such a short time, you've already gone through all my research notes, haven't you? But it's strange, Glast replied, a hint of confusion in his voice. I only glanced at a few notes, so I shouldn't be able to understand your intentions here. Hearing this, Ed began to complain. Do you really have to put pressure on me? Don't you just need to be sensitive to Isla's holy magic? You already have what you want, so there's no need to pressure me any further. I'll keep quiet, Ed suggested. However, Glast immediately rejected this idea. I have a goal, and this is part of it, so don't hold too much resentment against me. Glass spoke vaguely, which left Ed feeling extremely frustrated. Can't you explain a little bit? This is going too far, he said. Instead of using words to brush things off and telling him not to resent too much, Ed felt that the situation required more clarity. Don't resent too much, Ed thought to himself. It was true that even if he managed to escape from there, Professor Glast wouldn't just sit idle. It was very likely that this would complicate the plot even further. If he were kidnapped here, it was highly likely that he would be locked in a secret laboratory with Isla. It felt as if Glast was paving the way for him to reach the third trial. Should he really allow himself to be captured? Ed thought to himself. After weighing the pros and cons, Ed decided to surrender himself willingly. This action left Professor Glast somewhat surprised. Are you trying to force me into a fight? Or have you come up with a plan? Professor Glast asked, his tone measured. I won't treat you too harshly. As he spoke, Professor Glast cast the time prison once more, causing Ed's body to be trapped inside, completely immobilized. After completing this, Professor Glast began recalling the words of his assistant, Claire. Initially, he had doubted how Ed could succeed in his studies while living in the wild, as if his days were twice as long as everyone else's. Glast couldn't imagine the sheer amount of effort Ed must have poured into his work. These complaints are unlike you, Assistant Claire, he said. That's because I didn't expect his academic results to turn out this way, Claire replied, still in disbelief. Claire exclaimed, "If you look at the way Ed Rothtailor fights in the crystal ball, his combat instincts are remarkable." However, she quickly added, "But clearly, that's a low-level form of fighting." The low-level way, Claire continued, involves carefully observing the opponent and using every trick available. It's the result of hard work, not innate talent. This calm, untroubled expression reminded him of something he had lost in the past. The memory of the girl who had vowed to forge her own path and bring honor to her father resurfaced once again. Glast found himself lost in thought. Without noticing, at that very moment, the lesser fire spirit mug had quietly escaped outside and flew directly to Ed's house, where Jenica was happily cooking, waiting for him to come back. "Hey, Ed, you're home a bit late," the little wife muttered. Returning to someone's thoughts, the magic expedition in the southern continent had come to an end. As he explored this world, he realized there was still so much about magic that he didn't know. He felt he didn't deserve the title of Grand Mage. His master, Sylvania, who passed away young, remained a beautiful woman in his memories. Now, as he looked back, even the mundane days were filled with events. The sorrow had corroded his heart since the day he lost his master, who had become a distant memory over the years. Now, only an old, faded photograph remained. For someone who had lived for so long, sometimes nostalgia would overwhelm him. Sometimes, the feeling of regret over losing something would fill his mind, disrupting the order of everything and distorting the truth. Indeed, there would be moments when he yearned to see the face of his master, Sylvania, once more, and that desire would arise unexpectedly. But once something is lost, it is gone forever. Unfortunately, those who have suffered must harden themselves. So be strong, Lucy. For you, who marked the end of my life, I leave you my final words in this book. From the prologue of Glocht, the magical expedition in the southern continent. More than anyone else, Glocht was the one who accepted his death and calmly awaited it, so the girl had no choice but to let him go. Will there ever come a day when the pain of loss is healed, and even the wounds will fade away? What allowed her to temporarily forget the feeling of longing was the joy of holding a bag of dried meat in her hand. "That's all empty," Lucy murmured as she turned the bag upside down in her hand. At the same time, she noticed Mug flying over and whispered something into Jenica's ear. And then, immediately after, a dangerous aura emanated from Jenica. This also caught the little girl off guard a bit. The scene shifts to the main hall, where the ceremony to receive the sage's sealed grimoire is taking place. The scholars are selling the secret scriptures, while the merchants are buying them. Only the most important figures from each side gather here. Among them, all attention is focused on the leaders of both sides. Lordal Ketchuln, the temporary chairperson of the Elt Merchant Association. Opposite he is the principal of the Sylvania Academy, Abel Forcius. Looking at his face, Lordal recalls someone. The age and expression of this man are very similar to that person. However, he is also different from that person. After concluding the negotiations to purchase the sage's sealed grimoire, Crapin came to meet her, and he told her to hand over the sage's sealed grimoire. Hand over the book to Crapin. She had planned to do that from the start, so there was no hesitation at all. But that wasn't the reason behind the lie she told Princess Fenia. Lordal immediately quoted a price of 12,000 gold coins, even though she had initially requested a much higher amount. But he was willing to accept that offer and added, "Do you know that Elt has hired a group of mercenaries to come to Sylvania? Be careful, make sure everything goes smoothly this time." Crapin's attitude was anything but friendly, but that wasn't the issue. The information about Elt was valuable, and I had found a third party willing to buy his grimoire. All preparations are being finalized. At this moment, Glast also spoke up. Abel Forcius has relinquished ownership of the grimoire. Temporary President Lordal, please step forward and become the new owner of the book. Hearing him say that, Lordal stepped forward and reached out to touch the book. Now I will receive the profit from the transaction along with the purchase certificate. I'll have a chance to make Ed mine, she thought with a beaming smile on her face. Before that, teacher Glast started his tricks. While the transfer process was still incomplete, he suddenly activated a magic circle that he had prepared in advance and summoned 2 stone golems to attack both of them, to force the headmaster to hurriedly use his magic to defend themselves. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Glast swiftly snatched the grimoire and then used teleportation magic to disappear before everyone's eyes. And Lordal's face reflected devastation. Glast had vanished, and with her, her chance to have Ed slipped away, she thought to herself. Despite Ed Rothtailor not appearing, the story continued without any obstacles. The final chapter of Act 2, The Conquest of Glast, began with a scene in Professor Glast's secret laboratory. Isla was in a panic beside Ed. Ed was counting time and thinking, by now, Professor Glast must have gotten that grimoire. On this side, it seemed that Isla's screams were too loud, so, from outside, an angry voice shouted, "Shut up. If you keep screaming like that, the monster in the sewer in front of you will wake up. You two are really lucky," said Kum, a researcher of aspicutal magic. Professor Glast instructed us not to use you as test subjects because you're both highly valuable. Ed, remaining calm, said as if it wasn't his concern. His cold expression surprised Kum, who remarked, "You're calmer than I expected." But while I review the research documents, Kum said, "I'll be closely monitoring you too, so don't even think about trying anything." Ignoring such remarks, Ed began leaning against the wall, thinking, "We don't have to do anything at all. Just need to wait," Ed thought. "And Taylor will lead the conquest team to cause chaos? The library Taylor passed through has probably already collapsed. From this place," Ed thought, "I just need to take all the copies of magical formulas and techniques from many magic books. The plan will be completed once I have them. I just need to sit here and do nothing." The only thing that confuses me, Ed thought, is that everything is going so smoothly that it's making me a bit worried. Plus, I have to stay here with her. Ed, feeling frustrated, looked at Isla and called out to her. And Isla, upon hearing this, turned pale. "Just take one step, and I'll scream. I'll bite my tongue if you come any closer. I'm serious," she said. "Do I look like I'm lying?" Ed sighed and calmly explained. "I don't mean any harm to you. If I intended to hurt you, I wouldn't miss such a good opportunity, right?" Ed said. Having seen this from Taylor's perspective, he had to admit that Isla gave him a sense of reliability. Ed thought to himself. "However, this young girl still can't trust me right away. You're Ed Roth-Taylor. Don't waste words and just sit down. If we wait patiently, Taylor will surely come." Seeing Ed shout so loudly, she began to tear up. "Taylor," she said, "do you think you have the right to call him like that?" "Why wouldn't I?" Ed replied. "I'm very sorry for what happened during the entrance exam," Ed said. "But I had my own reasons. I also helped you during the Glasgow incident. Even if you don't trust me, you should at least trust Taylor. He will definitely come to save you." Ed's words made the girl's eyes widen in surprise. "Sorry, did Ed Roth-Taylor just apologize?" Isla thought in astonishment. Seeing that she had fallen silent, Ed let out a sigh of relief, but at that very moment, Mug's voice broke the silence. "Young Master Ed," Mug called out, concern evident in his voice, "are you all right? Are you hurt? There's a scratch on your hand. Did the magic reaction make you feel unwell? Is your vision still good? Any issues with your sense of smell or hearing? Are your fingers and toes okay? Do you feel tired or exhausted? Are you dizzy, or is there something wrong with your heartbeat? I followed your magic reaction to get here, but your sensitivity to spirits is still only average," Mug said, sounding regretful. "It took me a while to find you. I'm so sorry, Ed." Mug began to cry, feeling deeply guilty for not arriving sooner. Seeing its presence, Ed felt a bit pleased. He patted the bat's head and said, "Where did you go, Mug? Finding me was good enough." With her abilities, Isla could see Mug and asked, "Is that a spirit? Can you control spirits now? Before the semester, your basic magic skills were still very weak," Ed interrupted. "This has nothing to do with you." Despite his words, he was relieved because finally, there was a normal person to talk to. Meanwhile, Isla suggested that if Mug was a spirit, it could send a distress signal outside. "We could ask for help from the academy, or maybe the professor can sense the spirit," she said. This was a completely reasonable suggestion. However, Ed didn't want to do it because he didn't want to add more variables to this plot. But unfortunately, Isla didn't need to suggest it. Mug had already taken care of it. "You don't need to worry, young Master Ed," Mug said. "Although I can't guarantee your safety, I've been trained to report emergencies better than anyone else. It took me about half a day to get here, avoiding countless researchers, golems, and monsters. So it's been 2 days since then. But I still remember vividly," Mug said. Miss Jenica's unhappy face was truly beautiful, a genuine anger that sent chills down one's spine. Not only that, but the sly merchant girl and the witch girl with the magical hat, who often visited the wooden house, also showed a desire to collaborate. The three of them together had nearly the power of a large army. "Don't worry," Mug reassured Ed. "The rescue team will find their way down here. You just need to stay calm and wait." Mug smiled, unaware that his master was grinding his teeth in anger. "You useless thing," Ed muttered through clenched teeth. Isla, seeing Ed's dark expression, felt a bit frightened. "Hey, Ed Roth-Taylor, what's with that expression?" she asked. Ignoring Isla's words, Ed leaned over and whispered something into Mug's ear. Ed directly threw Mug outside. Then, Ed turned to look at Kum, who was not far away. "Hey, old man over there," Ed said. "I've changed my mind. I can't stay here anymore. I need to get out." "Let me out now. I'm serious," Ed shouted urgently, his hasty demeanor amusing the crow-mouthed man. "Ed Roth-Taylor, if you keep making noise, the monster over there will wake up," the man warned. "I'm serious," Ed warned. "If I don't get out, you'll all be in big trouble." The researcher couldn't easily believe this threat. "Look at you, beneath all those layers. You're still just a regular student. Just shut up," the researcher retorted. Ignoring Ed's threats, the researcher walked away. Meanwhile, Isla sensed that something bad was about to happen. She asked, Why are you panicking all of a sudden? You said that if we waited calmly, Taylor would come to rescue us." She was puzzled, but Ed was too frustrated to respond. Shortly after, Mug returned with a bunch of keys in his mouth. "I've followed your orders, young master. Your quick assessment of the situation is impressive." Before Mug could finish speaking, Ed waved him away. "Now get lost," he ordered. Then, with the keys in hand, Ed continued with his plan. Ed quickly opened the door to go outside, with Isla closely following him. However, Ed quickly closed the door, trapping Isla inside, leaving her utterly astonished. "Shut up," Ed snapped. "From now on, you can only answer with a yes or a no. Out there are countless experimental monsters and cursed magical items," Ed warned. "It's really dangerous. For now, just do as I say, and if they realize I'm no longer here, pretend that I've run away. That way, they won't harm you. Anyway, with your weak legs, you couldn't run even if you wanted to, right?" Ed said. Isla stammered. But Ed, as it seemed too many things were happening at once, Ed's patience was running thin. "Stop it. Please, just don't argue anymore," he said. "Will you do as I say or not?" Ed said coldly, glaring at Isla. Isla weakly responded, "Yes. Just stay calm and don't move. I'll handle this," Ed said before quickly leaving. The reason for all this was because he had heard that those wives were coming to rescue him. Unforeseen events can't be avoided. In the second act, veteran players provided a strategy guide for new players to clear this level. The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania Raid Guide Episode 2 is a concise summary of information and strategies for beginners written by Pepero Peep, including the final boss fight in Act 2. With these instructions, S thought that even small numbers could be resolved. His stats had increased significantly, so he could use the information he had to overcome most of the obstacles. However, there were variables beyond his control. He acknowledged this reality while preparing for the unforeseen challenges ahead. Ed wondered if Lordle or Jenica were involved. Their influence was substantial, and any involvement from them could shift the balance of power. He thought he could handle it, but even if it took hundreds of hours to try, even the most dedicated player might struggle. He couldn't figure out a way to defeat that unbeatable enemy. Even after hundreds of hours, the bad ending, 27, Lucy lazily didn't activate the event unless intentionally triggered, so he hadn't paid much attention to it. A bad ending will certainly occur if the conditions are met. The initial condition is that after the incident, Professor Glast met Lucy Merrill. Ed thought to himself, "I must find a way to stop Lucy from coming here." The scene shifts to Zig's private room. While this young physical wizard was enthusiastically practicing, he suddenly saw Taylor's panicked expression. "What's the matter, Taylor?" the wolf turned and asked. Then, he saw Taylor's disheveled appearance. Taylor looked utterly exhausted and worn out. "Help me, we need to rescue Isla right away," he exclaimed. The second act of the Failed Swordsman of Sylvania, Phase 1, the chase after Professor Glast. Taylor let Glast escape from the main hall, so he came to Zig's for help. With the help of many people, Taylor managed to chase Professor Glast down into the sewers and locate his laboratory. Below are the steps to follow. While familiar according to the plot, there are many differences from the norm. First, the Trees Hall, where Professor Glast stole the grimoire. Next, the sewer path he used to escape. Then, the Spirit Library, containing numerous magical equipment and techniques that Ed is aiming for. Below is the Monster Research Lab where Ed and Isla are being held. Lastly, the Central Laboratory. This is a route that must be followed in sequence. At each location, there's a lot to be done. Especially in the monster research area, it is extremely dangerous because Com has released many creatures there. However, since he went in the opposite direction, outside the monster containment area, Ed thought he could easily pass through without any danger. That was a stroke of luck. However, in this battle, he could end up with a bad ending if Lucy meets Professor Glast, so he needed to hurry up. But the issue here is that when passing through the Spirit Library, the guardian of this library is Reina. He had read extensively about the library and was familiar with Reina's patrol patterns. However, despite being familiar with Reina's patrols, caution was still necessary. The Spirit Library always had unpredictable variables that couldn't be anticipated. However, if they could defeat Reina, they would gain a lot of experience and valuable items. As the story progresses, more extremely difficult characters will appear. These enemies can only be defeated by many people working together with Taylor's swordsmanship. If Taylor doesn't gain the necessary experience to handle such situations, completing the mission will be challenging. Act 2 is the stage where Taylor needs to grow even more. Naturally, learning additional essential skills will be indispensable. The demons in the laboratory were released, along with the demons roaming the sewers. Along with the Spirit Library's guardian, Reina, who must be defeated by Taylor himself. Therefore, on this arduous journey, since Taylor isn't fully capable yet, it's essential to bring necessary magical tools for the mission. While thinking, Ed carefully reached up to the shelf and slowly took down a certain cube. This was a magic box that could generate lightning. Next, Ed needed to turn off the lighting in the library. Once the lights were out, moving around would become much simpler. Once this task was complete, Ed thought, he could finally escape from this place. Although there were still many items he could take, the essential thing was to move and chase after Professor Glast immediately. Meanwhile, Mug appeared and reminded Ed, "Master, you need to make the most of your time. Librarian Reina has moved elsewhere. She won't notice you." Hearing this, Ed nodded and replied, "All right, let's see, I'll go immediately." As soon as the words left his mouth, the entire library began to tremble violently, causing countless books to fall off the shelves. What kind of tremor is this? An earthquake? Ed wondered, worried since there was no such event in the story. Another unforeseen event was beyond his control, adding to his anxiety. Just then, something began to fall and exploded right next to Ed. The explosion caught Librarian Reina's attention, causing her to turn and notice Ed. "No, this is bad," Ed stammered. "Let's rewind 30 minutes, just before the earthquake struck." At that moment, the gigantic golem, summoned by Glast, was preparing to attack someone. However, before it could smash him to bits, the golem itself was frozen by Lordle. She cast a powerful spell and sent the golem packing, banishing it from the game. After finishing, Lordle glanced at the principal and said, "If this transaction doesn't go as planned, the reputation of Sylvania Academy will be completely lost." At that meeting, there were many renowned professors, and letting the sage's sealed grimoire be stolen so easily is unacceptable. Hearing her words, Principal Abelforcius spoke up, "It might take a bit of time, but I will retrieve this grimoire. Everyone, please wait a moment. Whatever plans Professor Glast has, his outcome will not be favorable." "So what do you mean by that, Principal?" Lordle asked again. "Of course, given how things have escalated, I must tell you the truth. Are you aware of the 3 taboos in the magical world?" the principal asked. "Bending the magic of this world, erasing memories, altering the flow of time, and influencing it, or rejecting fate in pursuit of immortality. These are the 3 taboos in the magical world: the pursuit of immortality, resurrection of the dead, and reversing time." Lordle, upon hearing this, the wealthy woman understood the seriousness of the issue. If Professor Glast escaped with his knowledge, he might want to resurrect the dead using his magic. If so, Principal Abel would need to intervene. In response, Principal Abel nodded, "That's what I wanted to convey." Now you might be wondering if I'm crazy for letting Professor Glast escape like this. Indeed, I am curious to know, Lordle admitted. The principal's face grew contemplative before he spoke. With someone as powerful as Professor Glast, if he worked for good, he could drive progress and development for this world. But for some reason, Glast is crazed and fanatically devoted to the Sage of Sylvania's beliefs. Perhaps the reason lies with his daughter, Muri, who died due to the backlash from learning advanced magic, despite her lack of talent. "This is a very difficult matter," Principal Abel said. "If he can resurrect the dead using his magic by reading the Sage's sealed grimoire, it means Professor Glast intends to bring Muri back to life. Do you think so?" As he spoke, he turned to look at Lordle, whose face was growing increasingly worried. And just at that moment, an employee rushed in to report, "Principal, something major has happened. Right now, Taylor is chasing Professor Glast, and he's heading toward the sewer gate. As far as I know, besides the grimoire, he's also taken 2 students with him. One of them is Isla, a first-year magic student," the employee reported, "and Ed Roth-Taylor, a second-year magic student." The familiar name slipped from the employee's mouth, causing Lordle's face to darken. Lordle quickly turned to Abelforcius, searching for his reaction. "So, Senior Ed has been taken by him, but what's causing this shaking?" Principal Abelforcius, a mage with substantial authority and power, had promised to return the grimoire to the academy. If he pursued now, he might be able to save Senior Ed. So, waiting here seems like the right course of action. However, the tremors and aftershocks appear to be coming from the entrance to the sewers. While thinking, Lordle hurriedly snatched a pair of binoculars from someone's hand and ran straight to the window to observe. Following her gaze, she saw that the source of the disturbance was a dragon, its mouth wide open, spewing flames continuously. It was none other than Jenica who summoned the dragon. Seeing the girl with the big chest starting to take action, Lordle could no longer sit still. He decided to check it out as well. This troublesome situation is truly unpredictable, Lordle thought. Perhaps I need to retrieve the grimoire myself. Those who aren't strong enough, stay here. The rest, follow me quickly, Lordle commanded sternly. And with that, she joined the pursuit, a plot twist not present in the original storyline. Dorothy, a skilled alchemist with considerable combat experience, is the leader of the third-year alchemy group. Her combat skills often leave her peers in awe, given her experience. Top alchemy students like Elvira from the first year and Norden from the second year frequently seek her guidance. However, during her first year, Dorothy wasn't particularly outstanding. It was Professor Glast who recognized her talent and helped her develop it. He was truly a benefactor to her. She always had absolute trust in him, believing that he had his reasons for doing what he did. Even though she didn't know his true intentions, Dorothy was determined to protect him. She specifically asked Professor Glast to let her guard the entrance to the sewers. Indeed, everything has unexpected variables, much like now. Faced with such overwhelming power, Dorothy could only tremble helplessly. You can do many things, she thought, but this might not be something you can handle, Dorothy helplessly said, as she faced the high-level fire spirit before her. Answer me, Ed, where is he? Jenica said coldly. Meanwhile, Dorothy was so terrified that she foamed at the mouth and fainted immediately afterward. Tarkhan mentioned this path ahead, but why is there no trace of him? Let's move forward and see what happens. At the third junction, turn right, then go straight and turn left, then again, go past the corner, keep going straight, turn right, then left. Damn it. I can't remember all of this, Jenica mumbled. Seeing Dorothy fainted below, she was startled. This was Dorothy, the third-year alchemy group leader. Why was she lying here? No way this was caused by me, Jenica thought. She can't stay like this, Jenica muttered, quickly pulling out a blanket and covering Dorothy. But just then, Lordle's voice rang out ahead. Oh, so, it's Senior Jenica. Hearing the call, Jenica looked up, finding herself in a somewhat compromising situation, as she was covering the face of an unconscious person below, almost as if covering the face of a corpse. Talking about Jenica, aside from Lucy, she's the most impressive and powerful student among the top of each year, leaving a strong impression on the professors. She has the power to control spirits, and she could destroy the entire sewer to find Senior Ed and ensure his safety, but right now, she still hasn't found him. Imagining this, Lordle had a brief fantasy about Ed. I've come to rescue you. You must have been so scared. Are you hurt? Let's go home now, and I'll cook for you, Jenica said with a bright smile. Jenica, you're truly a good friend, Ed said, his face lighting up. I was so scared when I was kidnapped. Jenica, you're truly the best, Ed said, his face lighting up. In the future, let's get married. Do you want to have a son or a daughter? Stop right now, Lordle yelled, shaken by her own imagination. Usually calm and precise in her assessments, Lordle lost her cool whenever it came to matters involving Ed. It seemed impossible for her to remain composed and make accurate judgments in such situations. Turning to Jenica, Lordle smiled and said, Senior Jenica, I heard Ed has been rescued. It's truly a joy. He was severely injured during the kidnapping and is now recovering at the cabin in the forest. He's always talking about you. First, I need to get rid of Jenica, only then can I rescue Senior Ed, Lordle thought to herself. But the girl with the big chest wasn't so easily fooled. She immediately shifted into a darker state and turned to ask, but Lordle, why are you telling me that? I heard Ed was kidnapped into these sewers, so I rushed here. But how could he have been rescued without me knowing? I was the first to arrive here. How did I miss that? Jenica questioned, her voice filled with confusion and suspicion. Lordle wanted to deceive Jenica, but it was clear this wouldn't work. Whenever it came to Ed, Jenica was laser-focused, almost becoming a different person. Realizing she couldn't fool her, Lordle awkwardly said, if that's not the case, then so be it. Now isn't the time to joke. Having you search for Ed with me would only add more trouble. But you must be careful, Jenica warned. Your group might not be able to accomplish anything. The professor is truly dangerous. Hearing this, Lordle felt a flash of anger at being underestimated but also knew there was truth in Jenica's words. She realized that if she was careless, it could put Senior Ed in danger. At first, I planned to ask Lucy for help, but she's always sleepy and doesn't pay attention to what I say. She only acts according to her own whims, Lordle thought. Jenica continued, since this is quite complicated, you should go back and wait for news. I'll go rescue him myself. Fine, now's not the time to argue. Everyone, stay here. I'll go this way, said Jenica, then I'll take the opposite path, Lordle replied. Now they'll act according to their own plans. The most crucial task right now is to rescue Ed. However, both of them wanted to be the one to save Ed first. Returning to Ed, it seemed he was in danger at the spirit library, where the tremors around the library still hadn't ceased, until suddenly, a crack appeared on the ceiling above him. A column of light suddenly struck librarian Reina, pinning her to the ground. Not good. I hope these tremors stop soon, Ed thought anxiously. The source of the light column was none other than Lucy. I saw you weren't coming back, so I came to rescue you, she said. Lucy said this while rubbing her eyes, looking like she just woke up, and with that, the rivalry between Jenica and Lordle ended before they even realized it.